Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of CSA Security Update. I am your host, John DiMaria. As cloud computing drives nearly every critical system in our world, one thing that becomes clear is we can't assume our trust anymore. Attackers are going deeper than ever, targeting the very foundations of our infrastructure and the kernels and hypervisors, the unseen layers that everything else depends on. So today we're going to dig into why system integrity validation is the new front line of defense, how continuous integrity measurement can provide early warning against zero-day attacks, and what it really takes to build a resilient, trustworthy cloud environment. And who best to discuss that with is with Scott Fuhriman. He is head of the operations at Invary, where he drives runtime integrity and zero trust security solutions for commercial and federal customers. He's a CISM and CISSP certified technology executive with over 2 decades of experience. Scott has architected, scaled, and operated secure private cloud infrastructure and managed security services that have protected organizations of all sizes and industries. And so I'd like to welcome you, Scott, to the show.
Great. Thanks, John. Appreciate you having me today.
Looking forward to this discussion. This is a topic that is on our minds every day, especially with the advent of AI. I'd always like to start out a little bit. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit about Scott Fuhriman beyond your professional life.
I've had a nice, fun, enjoyable career, but outside of that, some of the things I particularly am enjoying now is ATV riding, golfing, spending time with family as well, of course, but just really enjoy getting outdoors and taking in great scenery and that. So
yeah, and in our business, it's tough to find time for yourself. So good to hear. Good to hear. So let's get started here. I have some really great things on my mind here that I want to talk about, and start out with maybe we have quite a diverse audience, so to make sure everybody understands what do we mean by implicit trust, and why is it really such a critical vulnerability in modern cloud environments?
Yeah, great. So essentially implicit trust is an assumption, which is really the key part there, an assumption that someone or something can be trusted without needing proof or confirmation of that. And so you just are going to trust it regardless of knowing anything about it or having any confirmation of what that item is saying or suggesting.
Okay. So given that, how do today's attackers, how do they exploit these weaknesses in foundational components like kernels and hypervisors?
Yeah, so first, this concept of implicit trust has historically existed with kernels. We'll talk a lot about kernels, I think, today, just because I think more people have a direct association to them in our operating systems, for example. So, kernels are everywhere, but most users are familiar with their operating system that they use, Windows or Linux or whatever it might be. But for those that are unfamiliar with kernels, you can think of the kernel as the control center for all activity that occurs on a hardware or a software-based system. And so the applications that we actually use, they assume that this kernel, and it's a lower level of the operating system, they assume that they're always going to function as expected and therefore can just be trusted. And whatever the kernel says is how it is. And there's not really any questioning or verification of what that kernel is saying. And so it's kind of like the security equivalent of assuming that a foundation for a house is solid and reliable simply because it was built correctly initially. But no, you're not ever checking if it's been compromised in some way, right? And so implicit trust, with no independent verification has been a weakness in our security design as long as computers have existed, essentially. And so modern attackers, they specifically target these foundational layers of our cloud environments. This includes the hardware, kernels, hypervisors, containers, and other components. And the application and data that run in these environments all operate on this implicit trust of these underlying layers. And so an example to how are they, exploiting this weakness, they're using techniques like rootkits or more recently, bring your own vulnerable driver attacks and kernel exploits and privilege escalation to compromise these foundational layers. And many of these are invisible attacks, and they're done directly in memory. So there might not be a file on disk or traditional mechanisms used because they just go straight into the memory of the system. And once they gain access to the kernel level, they essentially own the system, and it's at its most privileged level. And so, for example, an attacker that compromises the kernel, they can control every component of the system, right? The requests that are received and responses to applications, the generation of logs. The kernel informs the security tools that we use, what is happening to the system. The kernel interacts with all the hardware components, so your disk and your network card and your memory and your processor and all that. And the kernel also enforces access policies and manages identities. And so, giving control essentially, or the attacker gaining control of this is, extremely critical for them to be able to hide, evade the defensive mechanisms and establish persistence, which does occur, and unfortunately it occurs a lot more than people really realize. The final thing I'll just say about it is I also just need to make a point that just because something is said to be sophisticated doesn't mean it's difficult to do. Those using attack tools are not the same people that develop them, and too many incorrectly believe that when something is sophisticated, it means they don't have to worry because they don't see sophisticated attacks, or they believe they're not a target. And this continues to be a dangerous thinking, and I still hear it from all levels of business, technology, and security leadership.
Yeah, so it appears that maybe traditional security tools and threat intelligence that we've sort of grown up with, I guess they seem to be sort of insufficient against these threats in a lot of ways.
Yeah, traditional security tools were designed with an implicit trust assumption about the underlying system, meaning that the tools that we use, again, they trust that the information that they look at and for, and that they receive from the kernel can be trusted. And so, because our tools rely on that to tell them what's happening, that creates a problem for the tooling. And the other thing is they rely on signatures and behavior patterns and threat intelligence about the key word here is known indicators of compromise, or tactics, techniques, and procedures. And existing security detection and prevention technology, these approaches, really they kind of have three fundamental limitations against things like advanced persistent threats. First, they depend on the compromised system itself to provide accurate telemetry. And if the kernel's compromised, logs can be falsified, processes can be hidden from the operator and the security tooling, covert movement established, and the attacker can make themselves essentially invisible for long periods of time. And the security tools remain oblivious to what is actually happening on the system. So, and then second, these tools are actually reactive, even if, we see them claim protection, which tends to have this proactive nature. And they do appear to be proactive because they can prevent things from happening. But the reality is they're still reactive because they require prior knowledge of the attack patterns, which means like zero-day exploits and novel techniques that have never been seen before. They're not able to detect those. And then finally, third, they operate at the higher level of the system stack above the kernel. And these tools have very limited to no visibility into what's happening underneath. It's like trying to secure a building by watching the front door and windows while leaving the back door unlocked, right?
Yeah.
And so a new approach to detection is needed that isn't dependent on previously known attack information. A methodology of independently verifying a system is actually in a good and expected state, changes the game in favor of the organizations and the defenders.
Yeah, that brings me to my next topic I wanted to talk about, because I'm a big fan of metrics, of understanding how things are working, giving the big picture. And I think
Sure, yeah,
the board actually, they're big on metrics. Board level doesn't like to get too deep into the weeds. So we're measuring integrity. How does that? Can you explain how integrity measurement and validation, how does that work in practice, and give us that sort of continuous health check of our systems?
You bet. So first, let me provide an analogy that kind of helps understand and simplify this for listeners. Think about our night sky, right? It's filled with billions of stars, a very complex universe. But there's constellations in the sky, right? Or shapes formed by certain stars, and those constellations don't change. So take like the Big Dipper. Everybody knows the Big Dipper, right? And it has the same shape and location in our night sky. And this establishes integrity or consistency. And we can validate it by looking for the shape and its location, and sure enough, it's always there, right? So if the shape of the Big Dipper, though, was to change unexpectedly, then we would know that something terribly wrong, or something has changed significantly in our universe, and we probably should look into that, right? And so this same approach can be applied in software. So let's take kernel integrity measurement or kernel runtime integrity. The two things that I'm very passionate about, and we're passionate about. Essentially, how it works is, in a clean room environment, you take the running kernel memory of an operating system, and it's analyzed to know everything about it in terms of data structures, code sequences, function pointers, and all the interrelated items that ultimately form a specific shape, like a constellation, and results in creating a baseline. Okay. Then an integrity measurement agent is installed on a target system to be measured and validating, for integrity. And that agent takes recurring measurements of that running system kernel memory, and it creates a specific shape of what that target system looks like for each measurement. And then you take the target system kernel shape and you compare it against the baseline kernel shape that was established. And through an appraisal process, you verify that both of those shapes match. And this is accomplished very quickly and with no noticeable impact to the target system. And so if they do match, as they should, that's what you want, then you can make an attestation that says, hey, this target system has integrity. And you also get the benefit of having an audit trail showing the integrity of that system throughout the lifetime of its operation. So this is great for security teams and leaders, and it also can help with audit and compliance. However, what happens if they don't match, right? What does that mean? When they don't match, you know that the system has lost integrity because something has changed that should not have. Any deviation from the baseline, any unauthorized modification to the kernel state essentially triggers a failed integrity alert. And then the important thing here is these alerts are binary. You either have integrity or you don't. And that's fantastic news for the security industry because we're often inundated with information and alerts, and it's a real problem for operations teams and whatnot. And so this eliminates that massive burden of data analytics and correlation and hunting efforts. Not that those things aren't important, but you can actually get a clear signal that says yes or no. And you can make decisions off that. So this fundamentally is different from signature or behavior-based technologies that rely on known event detection, because you're not looking for bad things. You're actually verifying that everything remains in a known good state, and it's state-based detection rather than known behavior or signature-based.
Yeah, so kind of like monitoring your health. Everything might look great, but you might see a little something that doesn't quite look right, and so that gives you an opportunity to investigate that. I see that. We're already in the era of continuous monitoring, continuous improvement, continuous integrity and validation, because we need real-time systems. How does continuous validation, for instance, how can that help detect zero-day or even previously unseen attack techniques?
Yeah, great question. So, this is where continuous integrity measurement, number one, we're not, it's not just being done one time. If you're applying this in a continuous fashion, that's what's critically important. And attesting to that integrity, this fundamentally changes the game, because now it doesn't matter what attack techniques are used, whether they've been seen before. Like literally anything that modifies the kernel state, like we're talking about attacks, but it could be something else, right? Maybe there's a corruption that occurs on the system, right? Maybe an update happens and something is corrupted. Like you can detect things like that even with this type of technology. So, but from an attack perspective, if something modifies the kernel state, even if it's never been seen before, that change is immediately visible as a deviation from the known good baseline. So, traditional tools ask, do we recognize this as an attack, this activity? Is it look like something we've seen before? Integrity measurement and validation asks, is the system still in its expected state? This means zero-day exploits, novel techniques, sophisticated, persistent mechanisms. They all produce the same result, a measurable change in kernel integrity. And the detection capability, transcends the limitations that we have with threat intelligence and signature and event databases and behavior mechanisms, because it's not depending on knowing how the attack works. It's really only verifying that the system, hasn't been tampered with.
Yes, it's interesting. So that begs the question as to why, with our current systems that we have, what's some of the key steps that you can take to integrate this integrity validation into into your current security frameworks without a lot of disruption and so on?
Yeah, super important, right? A lot of things, you don't want things to be complicated because then they don't get implemented.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, it's a whole culture thing as well, right?
Yeah. So one of the beautiful outcomes of integrity measurement and validation is a clear binary signal that states success or failure, right? And so when you're integrating into an existing security workflow or architecture or framework, it starts by sending these signals to an existing log aggregation or SIM solution or what might that already exists, and using those signals, those clear, clean signals, as part of your monitoring, alerting, and incident response workflows. So another method and benefit, of having an integrity signal is being able to treat integrity validation as a precondition for trust decisions, not just an alert, right? So think of before your zero trust architecture grants access, before your security policies take action, or verify that the underlying system reporting, you want to make sure that those things haven't been compromised, altered, or tampered with in some way, so that when those things are working, that they're functioning as they should and they're making the right decisions based on the right information. The next thing you'd want to establish is your response protocols for an integrity violation, because unlike many security alerts, an integrity failure is a high confidence indicator that something fundamental in that system has been tampered with, and it provides and arms your response teams with faster and better decision making. I mean, think about getting a failure signal and the change in knowing that happens to an incident response team. It's significant. Having been on lots of incidents in my career and managed them and run them and cleaned up and all that, knowing something like that is, number one, might be invisible and undetected by other technology that you have in place, and seeing now for the first time how that can change your response. And then finally, another major benefit to this is that there's no need to re-architect what you already have in place. Where many technology implementations can be highly disruptive to operations, require extensive planning, testing, and deployment times. Not that you don't still want to go through some of those processes, but this capability can be deployed quickly and easily right into whatever is already in place, and teams are amazed by this.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I guess that brings up another question about this, what I call, or we call the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and that balanced scorecard that we need to have. So one doesn't affect the other one too adversely. And so how do organizations balance that performance and scalability and security when they're implementing these measures?
Yeah, so a modern integrity measurement approach, number one, is designed to be lightweight and scalable across large environments. And the key to this is how it happens, right? The measurements happen outside of the system being measured. This avoids kind of the watching the watcher problem, where if you were to baseline in a compromised system, that could subvert your own measurement. And so some of the things that happen here are done outside of the actual systems themselves, and alleviate any burden on performance or scalability. And then performance impact is minimal, because really what you're doing is you're taking a configurable periodic measurement rather than scanning and analyzing every process and file continuously. And that can be really harmful to systems with traditional technologies. And often, users often complain, right? Like, oh, my system's performing slower once you install these security tools and things like that. Well, these measurements can scale across thousands of systems because they're efficient snapshots of kernel state, and they're not resource-intensive behavior and signature analysis happening. And then, scalability, being able to just deploy on across thousands and thousands of nodes, it improves the overall security posture, because you get consistent, reliable measurements across your entire infrastructure, cloud, on-premise, and and without the overhead that makes some of the security tools impractical in high performance environments. And so, I would propose that what's amazing about this is you don't have to sacrifice one for the other, which is very uncommon. You actually can have all the things and experience that and not have to worry about giving and taking.
Yeah, and so what? Having said that, who's leading the industry, and are any real world use cases are industries that are leading this adoption? It would seem to me critical infrastructure would be a perfect target for this integrity-based security controls.
Yeah, absolutely. Critical infrastructure would be fantastic. Those are environments that are very, very performance dependent. They can't have things in there that impact the operation and whatnot. But some of the other, what I would say is organizations that understand the fundamental problem that this addresses, and understand that like our traditional security tools, it's not that we don't need them. We do. They do great things. And they are important, an important component and part, but they're not sufficient any longer. And so organizations that understand that and that system integrity is fundamental to the future of securing systems, and those that really care about data privacy, those are the ones leading adoption. So this includes government agencies, legal firms, healthcare, financial services, technology, SaaS companies, managed security service providers, and the education industries, because they face, advanced persistence threats from internal cyber criminal and nation state actors, and these tactics are routinely used in kernel level memory attacks. So one real world use case is a large school district that understands that attacks are increasingly evading and bypassing their endpoint security tools. And so they wanted a way to validate the integrity of their Windows and Linux systems. And they understood that when I can validate that my system at the kernel level is good, they understood that helps ensure that my EDR solution is working as it should, and it strengthens their trust in the telemetry that the EDR systems are using to perform their function. And so they saw that as a way to strengthen their security posture holistically and make sure that their security tools that they've invested in and the money that they've spent is actually going to give them the most value and not be undermined. Another last use case here real quick is protecting a large multi-tenant HPC cluster used for AI training workflows. Kernel integrity measurement is used to validate and provide evidence that the system kernels of all the cluster nodes have integrity between training jobs of different organizations. And so they can attest to those different organizations that use this infrastructure that, hey, this system has maintained its state of integrity, especially with when you're doing AI training and you've got weights and measures and important data that needs to remain private and confidential. So another great value out of that particular instance also though is it saves an immense amount of time, because the other option would be having to reboot the entire cluster between jobs of different organizations, and they can save all that time by being able to say, hey, these systems have integrity. They're still working the way that they should and haven't been tampered with.
Yeah, when we have standards like CSA Star, which you're familiar with, and based on ISO 27001 and other standards, and I would guess that this is a great opportunity, even from a governance level, that this continuous integrity-based security can either directly or indirectly, I guess, strengthen the compliance and assurance programs that these standards are built on, I would suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, we're seeing some of that come to fruition where requirements in authority to operate environments for the federal government, for example, are actually now calling, we've seen it where kernel integrity measurement is a requirement for them to receive their ATO. I expect over the next several years, we're going to see this requirement start to be a part of more of the guidance and frameworks and regulations and things like that, and compliance frameworks. So, but cloud, like cloud resilience depends on trustworthy infrastructure, and that you can detect and respond to threats quickly and avoid negative outcomes. And so one thing that this integrity measurement technology provides is an early warning of foundational compromise. Integrity validation enables faster incident response, and it reduces the window of exposure. So when you can detect a kernel level compromise immediately rather than weeks or months later, you dramatically limit the potential impact. And in some cases, in a lot of cases, with that earlier detection, you can actually prevent the attack from actually occurring. The outcome, because usually, some of these attack techniques are used in the middle of the attack chain to like help move laterally, be invisible, but if you can expose that really early, you can get ahead of the attack and shut it down, and minimize that impacts. And for compliance and assurance programs like CSA STAR, integrity validation addresses, fundamental requirements around continuous monitoring, security posture assessment, and the protection of critical assets, and provides verifiable evidence that your systems remain in a more trusted state. And this strengthens your security certifications and your customer assurance. And it also supports the compliance requirements for protecting data, infrastructure integrity, and really demonstrating that you're not just monitoring what's happening on your systems, but you're verifying that the systems themselves remain trusted.
Yeah, great. So, I want to move into my what I call my crystal ball round here, and it's just I always like to give the experts a chance to, give us your personal view on things in terms of, what do you, what's the future of cloud security look like in a world where we may have to have integrity validation to become sort of that normal everyday processes across the board.
It's funny that they call them crystal balls because they don't always seem to be so crystal.
Yeah, not as clear.
But yeah, what I'm excited about when I think about the future is, and having integrity measurement and validation become a standard practice is the outcome being like shifting from a defensive posture where attackers have had historically the advantage of invisibility, not being fully seen what they're doing, to fundamentally change that, because when you can detect these compromises immediately and make them visible finally, it fundamentally changes the economics of attacks, because sophisticated kernel level exploits or whatnot, they become a lot less valuable when you can detect them in minutes, right? So we'll see integrity attestation become a kind of a precondition for trust in cloud architectures, I believe. Similar to how identity verification is, the hot item, I would say today, and everybody's pushing for, improving and enhancing that and requiring that. Before a system can participate in your environment, before it can access sensitive data or workloads, or before you upload a file, or before you log into a website, the systems, my system and the end system on the other side of that, if they can prove their identity, but also the integrity of that system before that engagement, that's a very different world and capability that we can live in. And this creates a foundation for more trustworthy computing experiences where, security tools can rely on accurate telemetry. Zero trust architectures can, enforce policy with confidence, and organizations can detect, even the most advanced threats before they cause significant damage. So ultimately, it's a future where this implicit trust is replaced by continuous verifiable proof and system integrity. So I think that's a wonderful world, and this is the technology we're talking about today is actually capable of getting us to that type of scenario where we can, know on this call right now, my system that's connected to this video feed and your system connected to this video feed, they are in a state of integrity, and I can know that before, we have this call.
Yeah, great stuff. Great stuff. Okay, fantastic. Well, I want to thank you for your time. I know, everybody's so busy these days, and so really appreciate you taking out time to talk to us. I guess the best way for people to get a hold of you is through LinkedIn, I guess.
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
Very
we don't
active there.
want we don't like to flood your inbox with messages, but so that's usually the best way, I guess, get hold of people.
Yep.
And yeah, we'll have to do this again. I mean, things evolve so quickly. There's always something new that we gotta discuss and talk about and clear up. So definitely look at this again. And yeah, if anybody wants to know any more about this or our research and around here, you can get a hold of Scott, or you can go to cloudsecurityalliance.org and look at our research artifacts there. And we can also connect you with Scott if you're having issues doing that. So fantastic with that, Scott. Again, thank you so much. And
Appreciate it.
yeah, we look forward
Great
to talking.
conversation, and really appreciate you having me on. Thanks,
Yeah,
John.
fantastic. Talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.